Okay, so this is Critical Discussions 28 once again because I need to re record this episode because unfortunately there were technical difficulties in the previous version. Unfortunately, there were a lot of audio issues, and obviously, it is not acceptable to release an episode like that. And unfortunately, I did not pick those issues during the recording because I just couldn't monitor it while recording. Hopefully, this time around is going to be better. So, we're going to just briefly, sort of in a more of a speedway, go through the same issues. And the first one, and we're going to basically talk about what was happening in Ukraine in the war of Russia against Ukraine in January of 2024. So first piece of news is basically everything that was happening around presumed sort of firing of Zaluzhny. Zaluzhny, in case some of you don't know, is basically commander of Ukraine armed forces, and he is a very popular guy within both armed forces and obviously within just generally within Ukrainian public. And so a lot of news in January, especially in the later part of January, were sort of speculating that he might be Zelensky, the president, might be firing Zaluzhny, and a lot of those news were coming essentially from Western media, from like places like Bloomberg or I think New York Times or maybe even Wall Street Journal. I don't remember all of them, but almost none of them were coming from within sort of Ukraine. And all of those sources were citing sort of their own sort of sources within like the cabinet of Zelensky, president of Ukraine, or maybe people around Zaluzhny and so on and so forth. Even citing something like, like the decision was already made and Zelensky was almost like out, and then like, I don't know, sort of United States called Zelensky and said it's like, don't do this, it's really bad or whatever. But I did not watch those news sort of unfolding in the English language space. I was watching basically the same source of information that I've told you before about, which is Naki, Michael Naki, and Ruslan Lviv from Conflict Intelligence Team, CIT, and they were very sort of surprised about it and very skeptical about this potential firing of Zaluzhny, because it did not make any sense whatsoever. It didn't feel like there is like a rift between Zaluzhny and Zelensky or anything like that. And in general, because Zaluzhny is such a sort of important figure and such a like powerful really figure right now, and powerful not because like he's a tyrant or anything like that, but just because people trust him and sort of regard him very highly. And also because, well, with the limited resources that he's done, essentially, the limited resources that he's done sort of as much as like humanly possible and even more, essentially, by trying to preserve lives, as many lives of Ukrainian soldiers as possible, while trying to sort of either recapture occupied territories, or at least like not allow sort of occupants to move further and so on and so forth, especially now in this crisis of ammunition and so on and so forth, which we'll be talking about it in this episode. He's done again like tremendously spectacular job, really, as much as you can use that word in this particular context. And so yeah, like people who actually like sort of more in tune within like the news and everything that's happening like inside Ukraine and Russia, like inside these territories essentially, and who can read sort of sources like in Russian language or like Ukrainian language and so forth, they were like very skeptical about this potential firing resolution. And I was actually trying to find like where it might be coming from and so on and so forth. And so if I'm searching like Zaluzhny Outset or whatever, like later it started to be reposted by Kyiv Post or whatever, but first it was basically like TASS that sort of spread this misinformation or disinformation campaign. And TASS is obviously a Russian Russian, basically state-owned propagandist resource. So, like, if you see that TASS reported something, it means that this is official Russian propaganda. TASS or Russia Today, things like that. They're official Russian propaganda. And in case you did not realize it yet, everything, literally everything that comes out of Russia, out of Russian officials' mouths, um, is basically misinformation, propaganda, and lies. And so that was like for me like really big red flag that this probably is not true. Um, and yeah, that's just that. Like essentially, yeah, Washington Post apparently made an article about it. Now it's I don't know. I think I've read it without this what's it called, paywall, but apparently now it's paywalled. It doesn't really matter. The fact of the matter is that um, these rumors that were going on essentially the later part of January, most likely not true, because today, as of the day I'm re-recording this episode, today is Wednesday, 7th of February 2024, and Zelensky is still in place. He's chief of commander of Ukrainian forces, and nothing happened to him. So yeah, like it even like Union, which is basically like one of the biggest sort of resources, like media resources in Ukraine, also sort of some reports that somebody was discussing this, but they're also citing the Times essentially, and sort of the all of the regular offenders that I was talking before about. So yeah, I really don't see how this could happen even. I don't understand why it would happen. And in fact, Zelensky published, I'll try to find this article, I don't have it open here. Zelensky published essentially how the war has changed and how drones are essentially right now is the big sort of new thing essentially, and how essentially how technology can win the war if applied correctly, so to speak. And yeah, I'll try to find and put that article in description as well, because it's worth a read essentially. And he's a well-regarded commander, and there is literally no reason to change him, because yeah, like there was a situation I think with the Ukrainian counteroffensive operation, when sort of, at least it was reported like that sort of aid from Pentagon and whatnot sort of essentially wanted to use the doctrine that like Western forces usually use, like in their wars, and Zelensky tried it on a battlefield as soon as they realized that like those like essentially it doesn't work in this war, like sort of going with like large amount of vehicles and so on and so forth. Essentially like they get destroyed, I think a couple of vehicles, and then yeah, Zelensky just changed it to like smaller, sort of more like infantry groups, sort of reconnaissance, sort of going quickly to positions, destroying some things, retaliating, returning back, so on and so forth. Do it in like not just like giant formation that can be like, I don't know, artillery shell or bombed or whatever, but do it in a more like agile, sort of a quicker way with less personnel in each sort of position and so on and so forth. Anyway, so he basically adjusted on the fly and basically threw away that Western doctrine that didn't work on a battlefield, and that was reported to save lots of lives of Ukrainian soldiers, of Ukrainian defenders. So yeah, he is just a brilliant commander, and like yeah, I just don't get like I am more than like I wouldn't be surprised if later we would realize and learn that it was like literally Russian misinformation campaign, which I will talk about in a minute, because that's definitely a topic for today's episode 100%. But yeah, just don't trust, if you like, if you don't like feel that it's possible and there is like a reason for that, don't trust just garbage that you read, because Russian agents are everywhere, and social media are absolutely filled to the brim with Russian bots and Russian misinformation, disinformation, which we might as well talk about right now. I was trying to essentially find this information in English language, this particular article, but it doesn't really work. I couldn't really do it. It's in German and it's also in Russian language, and it is regardless. Again, Russian misinformation. German Foreign Ministry uncovered Russian disinformation campaign on social network Twitter, and according to German magazine Der Spiegel, in just 1 month, more than 50,000 fake accounts published more than 1 million tweets in German, which condemned the support of Ukraine. And yeah, like that's that's the news. 1 million tweets in German from 50,000 fake accounts. Just let that sink in, right? 50,000 fake accounts. Like, how many people in general do you follow? How many news you're getting? You know what I mean? Like, there are 50,000 fake accounts just for German language alone, and German isn't even that big of a sort of population of speakers. Maybe it's like at the best altogether, maybe it's like 120 million people, and it's 50,000 fake accounts and 1 million tweets. If we were to speculate that there are around, because like Germany is like around, I think like 80 million people, let's say like there are at least like 40 million people more that know sort of German language, Austria, and just maybe other places where people just know German as a second language in general, right? Like, let's just say it's like 120 million people who know English are in the amounts of like more than 1.5 billion people. So like 10 times more than that, at least, as like native language or first language that they learn, so essentially second language, right? Like as a native language, L1 or L2, like native language or second language, essentially. At least 10 times more than that. So imagine if for Germany it is 50,000 fake accounts, it might as well be like 500,000 for English. It might be like not 1 million tweets, but like 10 million tweets in 1 month, in 1 month only. I'm telling you, and I've been reporting about it before when I was talking about Prigozhin's troll factory. I was reporting it way back in the day. You can go to YouTube channel, Critical Discussions, and just in a search bar type Troll Factory, you will get the video. And yeah, that's not a secret in a Russian speaking world. It's not a secret for somebody like me who basically like had to find like really like valuable sources of information in Russian. And it's like, I don't know, like maybe like 10 YouTube channels combined, all in total, maybe like 10 publications in general, and that's it basically, because the rest of it is it's just garbage. It's really bad, essentially, because it is filled to the brim with misinformation, with Russian propaganda, and so on and so forth. So yeah, this is not particularly like big news to me personally, but I guess like a lot of people in the West don't really understand just how big this whole thing is, and how like widespread it is. And we're going to talk about widespread in just 1 second, but essentially it is what it is. And I'm telling you, like, people need to wake up to this idea that Russian spies and Russian sort of, so to speak, influence, propaganda and misinformation are everywhere. everywhere. Like right now, obviously, I'm re-recording, so I don't want to bring like literal recent news, but Tucker Carlson essentially wants to interview or already interviewed Putin right now. It's basically second anniversary of the year. Second anniversary of the war will be it's just around the corner in less than 3 weeks essentially, and he is interviewing Putin essentially what to spread misinformation and propaganda, because this is the thing. People who are real journalists are being killed and jailed. They're not interviewing Putin or exiled from the country. So there's that. Again, I don't want to talk about it right now. I'm going to be talking about it in the probably next episode when the situation is a bit more clear. But anyway, speaking of the presence of sort of Russians everywhere, essentially. New investigation alleges Latvian member of European Parliament has secretly worked for Russian FSB, KGB, same shit, for 20 years. New investigation from The Insider alleged that Tatiana Ždanoka, a member of European Parliament from Latvia, has been working undercover for Russians Federal Security Service at least since 2004. Here you go, and this comes from researchers like Christa Groziev, which are one of the best investigative researchers, journalists in the world right now. So it's not just some like Todd Lakes. It's not just some like third, like fucking Tucker Carlson or something like that. Yeah. And all while Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia are amidst like free countries that essentially try to put as much restrictions sort of on regular Russian citizens who want to escape the regime, stop issuing visas, even expel certain people, even though they might have resident permits. They like sort of deny to prolong those permits, while they literally host KGB agents, while they host like basically like Russian oligarchs, people who trade with Russia, Russian citizens who continue to trade with Russia, essentially being sort of like third parties and so on and so forth. Just clean the house. This is what I would say to the Baltic states. Clean the house before you sort of tell how bad Russians are, because clearly inside of your countries there are a lot of spy networks essentially. Just wanted to bring this to attention because it's a little it's just a little appalling, to be honest, that this is what's happening. And a lot of sort of sleeping agents, so to speak, are in Germany, are in Austria, again in a lot of Baltic states, and they are all over the place. And as we know now, they are literally in United States Congress because of the fucking stupid brain dead MAGA Trump Republicans who essentially block aid to Ukraine, and that's why Ukraine is having nightmare problems right now on the front lines, literally running out of ammunition as we speak, and it's tragic and absolute insanity. While pieces of shit like that exist, and everything is fine with them, absolutely fine. So do with that what you want essentially, but it's what it is. It's the reality. As I'm saying, like, Russia doesn't really wage direct war against the West, but they do it in all of the other ways. They are essentially undermining democracies. They are stirring up the internal conflicts within the societies. They are essentially helping sort of illegal immigrants to get into other countries, to again stir like interracial and like sort of national conflicts and so on and so forth. They are doing all of those covert tactics by waging war against the West. against the Western democracies. And because they're doing it in such sneaky ways, there is very often no direct confrontation, so to speak. And so a lot of Westerners don't understand who they're dealing with. But most of evil that comes into this world is stemming just from several places. It is Russia, it is Iran, North Korea, it is China, it is, well, I guess something like Saudi Arabia in some regards, and so on and so forth. Like, there aren't that many sort of players, like evil players, on this like world map. And in some cases, something like Saudi Arabia even aligns sort of with Western countries against like Iran, for example, or something like that. In others, not so much. And so, yeah, like people just need to wake up to this idea that if they see something bad happening in their country, be it UK, Germany, whatever, they need to understand the roots of the problems. And it's very rarely that the roots are actually within the country. Or if it's within the country, it's thanks to some moles, some parliamentarians that are sort of pushing certain laws or certain rhetoric, right? Like Trump in the United States, for example, who is against helping Ukraine because he's in the pocket of Putin, obviously. As Tucker Carlson, who is also his buddy, shows right now by traveling to Russia and interviewing a dictator who is right now being interviewed by American so-called journalists, but he's not a journalist, he's a propagandist, and just at the best, he's a fucking tool that's being used by Russia to spread their misinformation campaigns. But at worst, he is an active participant in that. And he thinks that he's doing some kind of a pariah style fucking journalism. I think he's a bit smarter than that. I think he understands what he's doing, and he's just a piece of shit. Who's seeking attention. He can do whatever. Whatever. I don't want to talk about him, to be honest. He's a piece of shit. So yeah. And by the way, all the articles that I'm talking about, they will be in the description section. So it's all worth a read. And if some of them are in Russian language, just run it through Google Translate. Google Translate has become pretty good nowadays that you will definitely get all of the information in case I couldn't find sort of this info in English language. So yeah. Obviously, Ukraine thinks right now about mobilizing more people because the troops that are already on the ground right now, they are running tired, exhausted, but the whole population of Ukraine is getting exhausted by the war. And unfortunately, not a lot of people sort of want to join essentially the front lines. And this apparently might have been sort of one of the potential sort of rifts between between Zelensky and Zaluzhny, because apparently sort of Zaluzhny would want to draft more people, but yeah, essentially like it's like, you know, hearsay, because it's like somebody reported, like told reporters that military officials have asked, but Zelensky denied that they need like real additional troops and so on and so forth. So it's all kind of unclear, but I understand totally, and I absolutely support people who don't want to die, even in a situation like that, even in like absolutely dire situation where like your country is at war. It is about survival, but do you know what is even more important? The survival of an individual. Like, countries come and go over the millennia, like borders change, things change. And yeah, as far as we understand, like, you know, we all die eventually, but nobody wants to die quicker than they should be, than where their time is essentially, so to speak. And there is this self-preservation, obviously, kind of a thing in our DNA that we would like to preserve ourselves. And so I wouldn't blame anybody who don't want to go and defend essentially Ukraine, because it's understandable, uh, especially when you see how Western allies essentially kind of sell you out, or just like neglect their duties of supporting you. Because once again, I'm going to be reminding people who don't read history, who don't understand, there is this thing called Budapest Memorandum. And by that memorandum, UK, US, Russia, very interestingly, right, basically guaranteed the independence, guaranteed the sovereignty of the borders of Ukraine in exchange, in Belarus as well, in exchange of essentially giving up, and a few other, in exchange of giving up essentially nuclear weapons. And now, what MAGA Republicans are doing in United States is direct sort of violation of that memorandum. And after this war is over, I'm sure that Ukraine will stand, because like even if Russia will be able to capture all of the territory, they will never sort of bring these people to surrender. It's gonna be just like constant war everywhere. If Russia sort of thinks that they will be in that territory, you know what I mean? In the territory of Ukraine, it's never gonna happen. So it's inevitable that Ukraine will win. It is inevitable that Russia will fall apart. But what I'm saying, and where I'm going with it, is that Ukraine needs to develop their own nuclear weapons. Essentially, how it's done in Israel. I don't think Israel is like officially have developed nuclear weapons, but sort of everyone knows that they have them, and this is what Ukraine needs to do, without any sort of fucking hearsay from US or EU. Like, they shouldn't answer to nobody. They should be just doing that and having it in their arsenal. Simple as that. Simply because the cost of not having it in the modern world, unfortunately, is way too high. Way too high. And nobody knows that better than Ukrainians. And so, yeah, I don't know, fortunately or not, but I'm pretty sure, like, I read the news that this law that proposed to change drafting age from 27 to 25 has passed. But I think from what I've read today, just like one brief sort of line, it's that it's not that they will now conscript way more people, but rather that, and in fact, it seemingly has abandoned the conscription, but there is this forced, essentially, or I think kind of forced, essentially, training. I think like half a year. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. I'm going to be reading about it more, and probably we'll talk about it in the next episode. But essentially, as far as I understand, they've removed conscription because they don't want, essentially, right now to, like, scare the population, but they want the population to be prepared. So they are trying to again, like, prepare people, sort of train them, but not necessarily draft them into army. If it is in fact the case, it's basically sort of following Israeli model in a way. Although in Israel, I think everybody needs to serve, and I think it's like fucking 2 years or some shit like that, which is insane, but kind of understandable for Israel, not so much for Ukraine. But yeah, I will be talking about it a bit more. But I've seen today the news that I feel like that this law has passed, has been voted in. What's interesting is that there are still some like Soviet mentality sort of pieces of shit within Ukraine as well, which is not surprised. Like, we're all Slavic people, sort of back from USSR. There's a lot of sort of common, just like shared experience, so to speak, in a way. And there are a lot of who grew up sort of similar, like films or music or whatever. A lot of them, at least. And so, yeah, mentality of a lot of people is still pretty insane. uh, what is it like? Kombrig? I'm not really sure. Brigade commander. Okay, so some kind of a brigade commander in Ukraine armed forces basically called for sort of harsh mobilization. Essentially, if you don't go out of the car, shoot the knees. So people would understand, which is like that's insane. That's really insane. And so yeah, I don't know who that is. It is Anatoly Stuzenko in the interview to this channel. I will put the link into the description once again. But that kind of a mentality, that kind of a way of thinking is something like from the Russian book rather than from a democratic European country. And yeah, is essentially like he's essentially saying that if today like we will not mobilize, tomorrow people will like the Russian occupants will come after those who are sitting to those like armchair experts who are sitting in there, in front of their computers doing nothing. That's kind of the gist of it, what he was saying. But this rhetoric again is, this is not for a democratic country. So I'm glad that this is not something that's apparently going on and happening in Ukraine. Really, this is just sort of what one person thinks about all of that. But even that is quite, I don't know, it's quite offensive to just human intelligence, essentially. Because why would you need people who don't want to fight on the front lines? They will be more of a burden to you than to anything else. Like, it's just like, it's like like it's simple logic, but apparently this person doesn't really follow even the simplest of logics. So whatever, let's not spend way too much time talking about people like that. Anyway. I want to quickly mention a few things. One of them is that Russian air fleet continues to become, well, obsolete essentially. Another Airbus 1320 landed with a failed engine few sort of weeks before. Two Boeing 737-800 were unable to take off due to engine failures. There was also a problem with Sukhoi Superjet, which is the plane that Russians themselves tried to develop. Well, not really themselves, I think in collaboration with French company. Maybe it was Airbus collaboration. I'm not really sure. Doesn't really matter. The fact of the matter is that more and more planes are, turning into, metal scraps essentially because they're not being serviced. And I've reported about it probably like a year ago or 6 months, more than 6 months, 100%. Because that's when sort of sanctions started to affect essentially air travel and air fleet. Because, sort of right at the start of the war, Russia decided to just essentially steal like more than 100 planes that were on lease essentially from the Western companies. Those companies are, I'm pretty sure, doing okay. They just like sort of cut off these losses, sort of wrote them off of their balance sheets and whatnot. Insurance probably covered all of that, and they're fine. But because obviously now Western companies do not work with Russia, at least like in a sort of big way, right? Like maybe Russians can find some little streams how to get like sanctioned goods and so sanctioned parts, so on and so forth. On like bigger scale, Airbus, Boeing, they don't service those planes. Companies who are servicing the planes, whatever, delivering parts, they're not working with Russians anymore. And so they were even like scraping, doing this like more than a year ago, scraping sort of two couple planes, right, like just for parts, and then replacing the parts in other planes. And this will just continue, and there will be more accidents, and there will be probably more catastrophes and deaths. And I would really, really, really encourage people to not fly and to stay away as far as you can from planes, airports, and so on and so forth. In Russia, that is. Yeah, simple as that. Sort of related a little bit is the fact that insulin is apparently, I don't know, puffing out of the existence in Russia. Um, Apparently, it's hard to find it in pharmacies, and like, I, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's hard to even say something about it because while I'm sure there are a lot of sort of older people who are probably brainwashed and maybe even support Putin, the fact of the matter is that like there are a lot of people probably who will be suffering because of the suffering from diabetes and the insulin resistance or whatever, right? Like without this insulin, um, who are not like that, who are against the war, who just want to live their own life, who are simple people who, yeah, just want to do whatever they're doing, who don't want to, politics and so forth, which is it is a part of the problem in a way because if the Russian sort of society and like in general post USSR countries were more involved into politics and would understand more about it, the war probably wouldn't be here, wouldn't be in other places. There wouldn't be probably a Chechen war and then like war against Georgia and so on and so forth. Um, if people were more interested in politics and actually it's hard. It's actually like really hard to blame people because they were never really like lived during like good times, so to speak, stable times, and they were never like a properly good leader or like not even a leader but like good country in a way, because leaders, like, I'm so fucking tired of this, like, strong leaders, good leaders, like nobody needs leaders, like people have their own brains, just leave them alone. And neither USSR, like, yeah, the closest you can get is basically Gorbachev. He was the last more or less decent person sort of in politics in USSR slash Russian politics. Maybe slightly a little bit like Yeltsin, but then he chose Putin, and essentially any good that he might have done, it's like absolutely nullified and even like in the minus essentially because he put this absolute KGB rat into power. Um, yeah, so there's that. I don't know. I don't know. It's a little sad because once again, like these kind of things, like not having insulin in pharmacies or not having cancer drugs or antiviral, like anti-AIDS or HIV rather drugs that I've reported in I think a couple previous episodes, a couple episodes ago. It's all affecting people who are like least protected already, and yeah, simple as that. It's just sad that these things are happening. Anyway. speaking of sort of things about regular people, let's briefly move to Belarus, and I'm just going to talk why Belarusians do not protest. And in this case, it is a resident of city Lide was fined basically $550, $560 for a sticker in his own flat. And sticker is white, red, white sticker, which is white, red, white. Flag is basically a symbol of essentially independent Belarus, sticker for or flag of basically like a partisan movement, and yeah, movement of people who are against Lukashenko, for independent Belarus, for free Belarus, free from Russian influence. Basically, well, Ukraine is fighting right now for their own independence, and unfortunately, here people do not fight anymore after 2020 because, you know, like, there's literally no ability to do this. Everything was, or most of the things were was really cleaned up. There are new laws in place. You can be jailed for 10, 15 years. You can be punished even with a death penalty. There's a lot of things in place after 2020, and unfortunately Western countries didn't really help us back in 2020. Didn't really provide, I don't know what they should have provided us with, but nobody really cares about smaller country. It's only when it's like something like Russia and it starts attacking other countries, then okay, reluctantly people start taking all those matters seriously. But if they were taken seriously, matters that were happening in Belarus back in 2010, when basically there was another sort of stolen election, maybe the war wouldn't happen. Maybe even the Crimea wouldn't happen, because there wouldn't be like, yeah, whatever. Let's not talk about it. Anyway, so yeah, that's one thing. For example, there is another person in Gomel, for example, who has been forcibly put for like a forced medical treatment in a psychiatric hospital, because he was essentially defaming Lukashenko. Because believe it or not, there is a literally like an article in a criminal code about defaming president. So it's just insane. While United States has a freedom of speech as like nothing else on this planet, here, if you say something which is like which may be like factually correct, or even just expressing your own opinion about piece of shit, garbage, mustache potato Führer, you can be sent to a psychiatry ward or a jail. And that was apparently a chess player, so probably not the dumbest person, and doesn't matter. Then also another person got 4.5 years. He is a disabled person, and he was just drawing some caricatures, essentially a little making fun of essentially of Lukashenko. Igor Shumilov, he got 4.5 years for insulting Lukashenko, for insulting for insulting authorities. Yeah. Then there is a person who died in a Belarusian colony because of the caricatures. So yeah, that's why people don't protest. That's where I'm getting with this. Then 63-year-old pensioner with disability got 3 years and 3 months of penal colony for insulting Mustache Potato Führer. 68 years old pensioner got 6 years of penal colony for comments on the internet. This is all happening in Belarus, and it's happening silently. It's happening silently because I bet you never heard about all of that. And these are real people. These are lives of real people who simply express their opinion about dictator and about, living in a dictatorship, essentially. That's why I am trying to be as careful as I can to not show my face or essentially oust myself, because I don't want to follow them in some penal colonies for 4 or 5 years, wherever. Because, and this is something that Ukrainians don't understand, especially on Twitter. I've been just debating one really fucking brain dead moron who was saying that essentially all the Russians are by default bad Russians, and so you need to prove to Ukrainians essentially that you are a good Russian by either publicly stating something or whatever, you know what I mean? To which I replied, you do understand that if you are publicly saying something in Russia and you don't have an ability to get out of Russia, which 90%, 99% of people probably don't, because they're not top specialists who can either earn money from abroad or who already earn money from abroad, essentially, and who can live in other countries. What you're doing is essentially putting a red sort of cross mark onto yourself, and you will get fined and you will be jail prosecuted. And so what's the benefit? To score some internet points, ruin your own life to score internet points? That's just beyond stupidity. We got into some verbal confrontation, so to speak, and I said that you are a brain dead fucking moron if you don't understand this. But yeah, neither here nor there. This is what dictatorship is. It's going after individuals, and then news spread, and then everybody is in fear. Everybody needs to read 1984 and 458 Fahrenheit, frankly, because these are actually even though I sometimes I don't want those books to have been written, because even though I'm rather sure that writers were essentially Bradbury and Wells were 1984. Who wrote 1984? Wells, right? Orwell. Why did I say Wells? What did Wells write? Why am I tripping? What did Wells write? Oh, it probably was The War of the Worlds. But it's unrelated. I don't know why my brain brought that up. Anyway, obviously Orwell, 1984, Ray Bradbury, 458 Fahrenheit. Those people were writing these books as a warning, but unfortunately, these books have been basically taken as a manual, essentially, as a manual by really despicable regimes in both Russia, China, in all of despicable regimes. They are essentially following a lot of those tropes, rewriting history, sort of prosecuting individuals and sort of making essentially mockery of them, or like, putting all of it on display, sort of constantly barraging people with propaganda and misinformation, up to the point where you start to question your own sanity, essentially. And you definitely have no ability to protest. And while we're sort of on this sort of thing with people being sent to psychiatric wards or straight up penal colonies, something like that happened in Russia as well. Victoria Petrova was sent to a forced psychiatric treatment because of the so-called fakes about Russian army, which are not fakes whatsoever. It's legit facts about Russian aggression, about Russian war crimes, and so on and so forth, just because she was talking about it repeatedly, reposting things like that. She got sent to into a mental institution, and that can be sometimes even scarier than being in prison. And just in general, like, again, you have only one responsibility to the world, essentially. It is to protect your own life and to preserve your own life, and to do everything you can to stay sort of away from prisons and other, like, stay away from places where your own freedom can be in control of other people, can be controlled by other people, like mental institutions, like jails, whatever. That's what should be on everybody's sort of radar mind, and so on and so forth. And yeah, like, self-preservation instincts should prevail against, like, trying to score some internet points or whatever. You gotta be careful. You should be, like, very careful when using fucking telegrams and especially VK and whatnot. Like, just delete all of those things, like, because those are KGB's fucking dumpster trash. Odnoklassniki, there's another one in Russia. Just try to be as anonymous as you can when leaving, sort of hot remarks on the internet, especially if you are still living in the dictatorship states. Just be careful. That's what it is. That's how it should be. Yeah, anyway. There was a piece of news back in, I don't remember when it was. It's somewhere like in December, January. Essentially, there was like a naked party in Russia, and in like it was essentially sort of closed naked party, so sort of only for VIP people, and yet they've invited a lot of photographers, videographers, and essentially published all of that online. And so, first of all, like, so-called Z patriots essentially were super pissed off about it, and the organizer, Steve Leva, which is like, she's like 30, I think, or some shit like that, was targeted essentially, and I think she fled to Dubai, Arab Emirates, and apparently still wants to come back. Whatever, if she wants to get jailed, more power to her. Another dude who was basically there, like, literally naked with like a sock on a cock, quite literally. Like, I think he's sent right now to, like, I think he's sent to the front line. I'm not really sure about it, but whatever. I don't really care. There were basically, like, high profile celebrities, or some of them were like high profile Russian celebrities. And yeah, it's like literally what's that? What is it? Is it William Shakespeare? Like, there's sort of celebration in during the plague. What's let me. I'm so, like, uneducated. It's Oh, really? Okay, so it's Pushkin, actually. It's a Russian poet. A Feast in Time. Really? It's Pushkin? Really? I'm slightly surprised because I thought it would be something like. Anyway, yeah. So there is this a feast in time of plague, первое время чумы, and yeah, well, they were doing essentially that. Like there is a war going on, and they're putting naked party, inviting shit ton of people, and then broadcasting this. If you wanna do your private naked parties, do it. Like, more power to you. It's great. Like, whatever. If you wanna like show off your improved thin body, like go for it. But like, do it quietly. Like, read the room for fuck's sake. Um, Again, couldn't care less about all of that. I'm absolutely fine. You do you. What as long as you're not hurting anybody else, you do you. And if you're hurting somebody, it should be consensual. Or if you are into your BDSM, or do whatever the fuck you want. As long as it's consensual, and as long as you don't hurt anybody, as long as there's like no minors or something like that, whatever you want. But like, you are in a dictatorship country that's in the middle of the war. Like, you will face some consequences. Whatever. I just wanted to acknowledge that happened. And now that and she was basically that organizer, Ivleeva. She was actually basically presenter on a TV, on a Russian TV. Like, so she was basically in that whole system. It's just interesting that people who are in that system, who like benefit from it, who make money and so on and so forth, like they don't understand in what kind of a space they're in or something. I'm so perplexed. And they're saying that nothing like that happened since 1930s, because suddenly they were all like being targeted and people harassing them, and a lot of them are actually then later recording videos and apologizing. I'm not going to be playing any of that, but I'm putting all of that essentially into comment section, into descriptions. Read it again. It is in Russian because there is no like English version of that, because it was basically mainly a Russian sort of event. But like, you can easily translate. Just put all of that into Google Translate, and yeah, you will see what people were saying, what kind of comments they've got, and so on and so forth. But it's just remarkable. Like, your country annexed Crimea 10 years ago. It's going to be 10 years this year, which is insane to think about. And yet you didn't realize that, and the country is 2 years into a war, full-scale war, and yet you don't realize that, it's not 2000, or it's not 1990. It is 1930s. Yes, they are back. Hello and welcome. Anyway, just wanted to acknowledge that once again, because it is important just to see it and understand it. All right. Okay, now let's quickly go for like a few news. About 90% of Russian youth do not see any sense in essentially revitalizing, I don't know, what is it? Revival. Yes, revival. Sorry, revival of traditional sort of traditional values, and revival of USSR. This is something that Russian propaganda says all the time. This is something that Putin sort of spews out all the time from his filthy mouth, that essentially sort of wants to bring back his youth, wants to rebuild Russian Empire or whatever. And 90% of youth Russian do not want essentially like national traditions and values, or return of status of superpower like USSR. 90% of those don't want. What's kind of bad is that this thesis that people want like national traditions and values is being supported by around like 11% of people, 14 to 35. and that about 13% of people want Russia to be essentially a superpower like USSR. That means that there are a lot still, like 10%. Let's stick to 10%, just for easier calculations. If we sort of think that there are like 120 million people living in Russia, if like 20% of them, probably more than 120 million, but let's say even if 20% of them are sort of this youth 14 to 35, it's 20 million people. So about like a tenth of them, at least like a couple million people. I know it's like very, very big generalization, but at least like a couple million people actually want back to USSR and national traditions and values and shit like that. So, by the way, when I'm saying national traditions and values, this essentially says anti-gay, anti-sort of all the like LGBT or whatever thing. That's what sort of means in Russia, national traditions and values. But more worrying is this superpower kind of a thing. So at least a couple, maybe up to like 3, 4, 5 even million of younger. I mean, this is not the correct demographic. Because 14, what the fuck do you know about life at 14? So it should be like 14, 17 maybe, and then like 17 to 25, and then like 25 to 35. This should be at least like 3 age groups. So, and again, like I've mentioned before in previous streams and recordings, you shouldn't really trust what kind of a social demographics things that you are getting right now out of Russia. Even though this one is sort of anti-Putin rhetoric, essentially, you still should be really careful how you interpret all of this. If nothing, just because of this 14 to 35. Why the fuck would you think to ask a 14 years old about anything fucking politics related? Who gives a fuck? He cannot vote. He's a fucking stupid moron. He's a 14. He doesn't. His voice probably didn't break still. He probably doesn't get like fucking pubic hair. So it's like, it's so dumb about this particular thing, but whatever. About like I'm sort of giving you this information just to show like not all of the Russians are bad. A lot of like younger Russians are way more sort of westernized, so to speak, than people might sort of think and imagine. Like a third of those people in this questionnaire were basically saying that fighting corruption is a big priority. 33%, it's quite a lot, and essentially Biden essentially sort of being for constitutional rights of humans, also about 33%. That's, you know what I mean? That's 55% do not want to get rid of their own like Western goods, clothing, computers, even furniture. 52 don't want to stop using Visa or MasterCard. 69, very interesting number, are against any sort of limitations on free use of internet. And even more, 87% do not want to pay for this sovereignty, in air quotes, by like raised taxes. 86%, sorry, wouldn't want their pensions or essentially salaries to be like frozen, or essentially people want to live prosperously. Again, 68% do not want to essentially give up anything, essentially, in exchange for all those like propagandist ideas. So what I'm trying to say is that younger people, in Russia, they're pretty westernized. I'm sure you can find morons who do go to Ukraine right now and try to kill Ukrainians and so on and so forth, a lot of them are doing it for money because they're from poor regions and whatnot. but but that's just because Russia is a pretty big country. You will always going to be able to find like 100,000 poor people, desperate people, so on and so forth. That's why Russia sort of is banking on that fact. That's why they don't concentrate on improving Russia, but they're actually robbing it blind, like in like sort of like the amount of oligarchs in Forbes, you know, 500 or Russian oligarchs there is. Those who did not create anything but just robbing people of the natural resources and profit all of it is insane. You can open it and take a look. Well, take a look for the year like 2021 or whatever, because obviously 2022, 2023, and 4 maybe things have been adjusting because of the sanctions and this and that. Maybe that can all affect. But go back a few years and take a look how many Russians are there. Russians or, sort of Georgians with Russian passports and so on and so forth. Like there are a lot of people there who haven't created Apple or Amazon or, those kind of things. And even those who did, something like Yandex, which is like the Russian Google essentially. The company has been already essentially sort of taken over by FSB, essentially, by Russian government, essentially. So yeah, it's as simple as that. This whole region has been under mafia control for over 30 years. And there's absolutely no other way to put it. And what's worse and what's really, really saddening and unfortunate is that the West was dealing with those crooks, with Russian mafia essentially for years and years and years and decades, instead of trying to uproot the democratic sort of institutes in both Belarus, Ukraine, Russia, and to educate people and so on and so forth, like to try to bring down those regimes from the inside, so to speak, or from the outside. Just don't fucking trade with them. Let them cook in their own little whatever pot. And it only took like the biggest war in Europe since World War II to actually start doing this, in terms of cutting Russia off of gas and oil, money and all of that thing. And even that is still 2 years after the war, is still not really finalized and so on and so forth. There's still a lot of loopholes and this and that. So yeah. And now, of course, the big news about January is that right after essentially sort of Orthodox Christmas, right after like 7th, 8th of January 2024, Russia started to bombard Ukraine once again with a lot of missiles, a lot of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, a lot of rockets and everything like that. In January 23, Russian strikes on Ukraine kill 18, wounded 130. Just essentially the residential buildings, and it's always residential buildings, and just a couple standing and smoking, looking at what's left of their houses. Like, how do you think these people will think about Russians? I mean, I understand, obviously, like I do understand that. Sort of going back to my discussion on Twitter with that one person, but it's always easy to just hate like everyone altogether without thinking about in detail. And truthfully, like if I were on their place, yeah, I wouldn't think about any details whatsoever either. Just today, on 7th of February, massive Russian airstrike once again, because there was some sort of a quick kind of I don't know, maybe a couple days sort of more quiet period, and today again massive airstrike that kills quite a lot of people in Ukraine. Again, just civilians, literally just regular buildings of people. 80-story residential building, just regular houses. And then um, on January 30th, there was a shelling. In this shelling, both sides sort of blamed each other. There was literally a news that Ukraine says 3 killed in attacks shelling, and then Ukrainians shelling of Donetsk kills 3. Russia says. So it's literally like, I don't really know what happened there. I would think it's probably Russia, to be honest, but at this point, I'm not really 100% sure. Russia launched 40 missile drones overnight, 40 missiles and drones overnight on January 13th. More than 20 devices have been shut down, but again, half of them still sort of reached their targets, and the targets are civilians and just regular buildings. Damaged 26 buildings, wounded 1 civilian. Apparently, nobody died in that particular shelling, which is just a blessing, essentially. 13 wounded in Russian strike on Ukrainian hotel prior couple days, January 11. 2 missiles hit a hotel in the center of Kharkiv. Again, Kharkiv not that far away, essentially, from the front lines. No military personnel, just 30 civilians. I will put all those links into the description, but yeah, this is just a war. That's what it is. Sergei and Christina tried to escape Mariupol, but a missile hit their car. They lost their daughter. She lost her legs.
Человеку перервало руку.
The husband lost an arm. This is the war. This is the war. And meanwhile, MAGA Trump Republicans are sitting in a fucking Congress with straight faces and denying aid to Ukraine, while Ukraine is running critically low on ammunition. And Russian forces are advancing. And that's going to be remembered, I think, by historians for decades to come. For years to come, 100%. Especially, I think right now, sort of this new and updated kind of a bill was reintroduced, I think, to the Senate, and they will vote on it, I don't know, today, tomorrow, this week, I think. Most likely. Because they're bought by Kremlin and by Trump. Most likely is going to be turned down, even though basically Republicans meets criteria were mostly satisfied about securing the border. And yet, I'm afraid again, because several in Republican Party have been bought. I don't think anything good will come out of it, but we'll see. what I talked about before is that like Russia is testing electronic warfare systems in Kaliningrad, and apparently in January 19th, 2024, half of Poland was left without functioning GPS system. If this isn't essentially like a war on Western countries, what is? Like, do you really need like a direct confrontation to understand what's going on, or to like fully realize that this is how Russia operates? They rarely do this like in, sort of upfront, in an upfront manner. They're usually doing it as a fucking sneaky bastard, hitting you from behind and from the side. If you are fighting with somebody 101, there's gonna be that like shorter cunt who is almost always that vocal cunt in the group who is instigating the fights and everything, and then running away essentially after being fucking smacked in the face once. And then that cunt will be going behind somebody's back and like punching them from behind in the ear or something like that. That's Putin, basically. That's Gopnik mentality. That's what it is. And this is what Russia is doing, like I'm saying before, by introducing, sort of implementing their agents all over the place, by spying on people, by doing these kind of fucking garbage measures, like just hit couple of those fucking Kaliningrad places, like, military bases and whatnot. Just destroy that fucking garbage and be happy, because Russia will not do anything about it. But instead, the West is showing how sort of fragile and, I don't know, like scared still, indecisive they are collectively, both EU and US, unless it affects the shipping lane. Against Houthis, Yemen, yeah, they will strike. Against this, they're doing nothing. This is just legitimizes all those essentially regimes like Iran, China, and so on and so forth, who sponsor terrorism across the world, and who see that good people are doing nothing, and the evil wins when good people do nothing, unfortunately. Anyway, there was a giant fire at the warehouse, Wildberries warehouse. Wildberries is kind of something like Amazon in Russia. 70,000 square meters. It's like 10 billion rubles damaged. What is it, like? It's gonna be what, like $100 million or something like that. If my calculations are correct. I'm not sure if they're correct. Maybe 10 million, because 100 million is a lot. Wait, let me calculate it. Yeah, no, I was correct. It's about like $100 million worth of damages. Apparently, fire alarm was turned off because it was like false reporting fires a lot of times. Apparently, also, I've heard that this whole thing was like uninsured, because apparently it was almost like illegally built there. I don't understand how you can build 70,000 square meters worth of warehouse, because it's been burned basically completely. Oh no, it was half of it. So 100,000 square meters of a warehouse. How you can build that illegally? There's probably a lot of bribery was involved into that. And I think that came. It was in January as well. That came after a few like harassment videos and harassment rhetoric against essentially immigrants from East Asian, things like that, like other ex-USSR sort of countries. And there's a theory that people were really pissed at that rhetoric who worked there, and they just set it all on fire. But just look at how stunning it works. Somebody caught it from the plane. How insane that looks. And if you're listening to it, go take a look at Critical Discussions number 28. This is just like on YouTube channel. This is just something. Like not every day you can see something like that. It's like some apocalyptic movie essentially. Also, now let's quickly talk about something really great that Ukraine is doing. That is attacking a lot of Russian oil refineries. So this is more like a recent news, basically like a week ago, right when I was recording that episode. But unfortunately, like I'm saying, there were technical difficulties that I didn't catch, and so now we are re-recording it. So Ukraine was able to do some really great drone strikes on Novorossiysk, which is a port on Black Sea, and in like St. Petersburg and Ust-Luga, where once again Russia has oil refineries. And I think it's like people understand now what Ukraine is doing, and probably Russians also understand. But what's interesting that I've seen like maybe like a mayor of either St. Petersburg or like a St. Petersburg region basically said that we cannot do anything about those drone strikes on our oil refineries and ports because we don't have enough of air defense systems, and basically nobody's given us those air defense systems, additional ones, because they're all sort of used sort of on the front lines at Ukraine or protecting Moscow essentially, or Putin's like residency, shit like that. And it's absolutely fantastic and brilliant because Russia was still doing a lot of oil trade, and a lot of companies were still buying a lot of oil from Russia, and obviously that's a lot of money still going into Russia. Now that basically gas money essentially is non-existent because Russia destroyed their own how's it called? What was it called? Nord Stream, right? Nord Stream 1 and 2, most likely that they've done it themselves. Yeah, they were still getting a lot of money essentially from oil trade, and what they were doing is basically putting a lot of oil into Novorossiysk port, and then maybe transporting some things to like Turkey, for example, and then changing and mixing Russian oil with somebody else's oil, maybe like Azerbaijani's, Turkish, whatever it might be, and then sort of selling it further down the line, essentially as, well, it's not Russian oil anymore. It's whatever country's oil, Turkish oil. And they were getting a lot of money. And Ukrainians apparently realized all of that and started to do these operations, directly attacking those sort of narrow points essentially, right, where everything is happening, right? Because it's just like several ports that can service tankers, where the oil refineries even are, or those oil reservoirs and so on and so forth. And they decided, okay, Europe, if you are not doing anything about it, well, we are going to be doing something about it. And it's brilliant, it's amazing, I'm all for it. Go for it, Ukraine. And as far as I know, as far as I remember, nobody died in those strikes. yet anyway. I'm sure probably at some point something will happen, but as far as I know, yeah, nobody really died. I think few people probably got injured, and Russia always denies it. Russia always says that something like they shut down the drone. But yeah, the way they shut down the drones is always like, the drones always hitting the targets, essentially. Which is, like I'm saying, which is just brilliant. And yeah, it happened several times in the end of in the middle and the end of January in St. Petersburg, which is also very far away from the battlefields. And just from the territory of Ukraine, it's like, I think, like almost 1,000 kilometers or something like that. So yeah, it's just brilliant that Ukrainians can do it right now. So kudos to them. More power to them. One thing that happened just very recently, again, right now this conflict has been resolved already, but at the end of January, B2, which is Belarusian / Russian rock band, it pisses me off so much when they do it like that. Russian Belarusian rock band. It's not, because both like forming members are from Belarus, even though they don't live there for the longest time already. They don't live in Russia they don't live in Russia either, and they've been vocal critics of Putin. They were against the war and so on and so forth. One of them has Israeli citizenship, one has Israeli citizenship, out of those two main band members, forming members essentially. And then I think 3 or 4 other people also have Israeli passports. All but one, basically. The only one person essentially only has Russian passport so far, but he's not living in Russia either. He's living in UK. Why am I telling you this? Because they were with a concert in Thailand, and apparently somebody fucked up some kind of a visa thing for them, and they got detained after their concert. And sometimes Thailand, quite a apparently corrupt country, things happen like that you get detained, you pay some money, you get essentially out of the prison. They first decided to do everything formally. Things kind of didn't work, apparently, as I've read later. And I will include the link to the bigger sort of interview with them that I've read. But long story short, things kind of took the darker turn when essentially a Russian embassy said that Russian Foreign Ministry, Russian Embassy, Consulate, said that deport them to Russia, which is basically what Russians tried to do, is to try to show other people who are vocal critics of the war that they cannot feel safe even in other countries. And that's another sort of Russian tactics, poisoning people in other countries, threatening them in other countries, so on and so forth. So that was 100% done by probably even directly sort of top level Putin, surrounding whoever. Maybe, I'm not sure, directly from Putin or somebody around him, because they wanted to please the boss or whatever. But essentially the band was sort of detained and transferred to another facility, and then they spent several days. They spent essentially over a week, I think, or close to a week, in 2 Thailand prisons essentially. And luckily, as of right now, this whole thing has been resolved, and all of them are all of them, flee. Were able to were able to get out of the Thailand, and that was definitely a scare tactic to show people that, well, not to show, just to scare other people, and to make it as an example that, like, don't feel like even though you are outside of Russia, don't feel like you're safe, which is an interesting tactics. I would just say to people, just don't ever travel to questionable places. Just do your concerts in United States or in Europe. Don't go to questionable places. And I'm sorry, but fucking Thailand or whatever, your Cambodia's or fucking China's and so on and so forth, like, they're shitty places with pretty much no or very poor very poor sort of considerations for human rights. So just don't go there. Don't put yourself into danger. And like I was saying before, people should think about their own freedom and how to not end up in places where their freedom is essentially limited. That should be main priority of people. At least until, like, all the Russian regimes and, like, Chinese regime and Belarusian regime and Iranian regime, and North Korea, unless all of those cons essentially will, like, be eliminated, will die, disappear, I don't know, like, things like that. People are not really safe, and they should be careful. But the situation was resolved, and luckily they were able to travel safely back to Israel first, and then probably fly to Australia or UK and so on and so forth. So yeah, wanted to really talk about it quickly. Now let's go just, like, quickly a few cases. Russia prosecuted 5,500 cases of military desertion in 2023. Mediazona. This is, like, official essentially. By independent news website Mediazona reported that almost 5,600 Russian soldiers face trial because of their refusal to serve. That's not that much, because essentially that's, like, about, like, 2%, 1 to 2% of all those people who were probably, like, conscripted, drafted. That's not that much, but at the same time, it is not nothing. And there are people who essentially say, like, no, we're not doing that. And also, and also in 2022, there were at least 5,000 cases. And so, like, there are people who are refusing to fight. This is also something to be noted. And it might not be like half of the army refusing to do that, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5%, it is still something. And this is just official cases. We don't know how many cases of people simply refusing to do that, and then they've been thrown into, like, holes, essentially, how they're called, like, in Russia, essentially, basically, like, mini prisons in, like, within sort of the front lines and things like that. Or some of them might be even dead right now because they refused to fight. And so, like, the amount of people who refuse to fight for Russia is not zero. That's all I wanted to say. Even within those people who were conscripted already. Good news, really good news, that 207 Ukrainians were brought back home from Russian captivity. It happened at the end of January 31st. Zelensky announced that 207 people brought back home, in swap in the 50th exchange. So that's obviously great news. Another good news is that Pentagon comments on provision of JLSDB bombs to Ukraine. They officially acknowledge that they will provide Ukraine ground launch small diameter bombs. Also, really good news. Again, this should have been done 2 years ago already, but here it is, so to speak, right? Another good piece of news is that EU moves to tap profits from frozen Russian assets for Ukraine reconstruction. So, in case you're not familiar with the situation, essentially like more than $200 billion euros were frozen in EU. It's frozen assets of Russian central bank, and even though Ukraine does not sort of get all those money, so EU, which is, I think it's a mistake, but whatever. EU did not confiscate this money, so to speak, from Russia, but essentially want to use those money, and with the like percentages, essentially with the interest rate on those money, that interest rate they essentially want to take and give to Ukraine, dividends, interest rates, that kind of stuff. That's an interesting sort of workaround. Not confiscating money, but then also not really giving it, not really like not doing anything with it. You know what I mean? It's like it's something. It's better than nothing, really. But I don't know. I would have just given this all to Ukraine, obviously, and because it's the only fair thing. But who am I to say that? Of course. Then another sort of kind of okay news as well. European Commission proposes to cancel duties for goods from Ukraine in 2024. Again, for certain goods, so Ukraine can more easily trade with Europe and sort of put money into their own budget, into the government, and sort of continue to function as a society and as a country. Because obviously it's crucial right now to pay governmental worker, like postal workers, all that kind of stuff. It's obviously hospitals and everything like that. It's really crucial to continue functioning in society, essentially. So that's just a little portion of good news, so to speak. Now, one very sort of tragic thing about Russia, that a former investigator from Ufa was raped right at the police station by 3 officers, and the court sentenced man to prison, but after a successful appeal, a second guilty verdict, and another appeal, all 3 men soon found themselves free. So you can rape a woman, 3 people raped 1 woman, and then they got away with it. In addition to living through the hell, it's not ordeal, it's hell. Gulnaz Fathli Islamova, I guess, was fired, faced media harassment, and was forced to participate in this courtroom proceedings. And she talked about all of this in the interview, and I'll include the story. The only thing I'm sort of like, why did you do this? Because she essentially joined police force right after college. She had been working as an investigator just for a month and a half when she was raped. But like, why do you go and work there? Like, no good people work in police in dictatorship countries. There's just none. Like, they're not there. No, probably in the past 20 years, probably no police officer ever helped actual person who needed help. Nobody solved any real problems, crimes, or whatever. Why would you do this to us? Why would you go there? You need to be certain mentality to go into lay with the snakes, wolves, whatever. It's not like this. I just don't want to even say this. You fuck around and then you find out, because this is obviously insanely tragic what happened to her, and this is absolutely traumatizing. I have no doubt about it. But protect yourself. You know what I mean? Don't try to avoid situations like that, and instead of literally going and working in places like that. Anyway, the story is obviously about the fact that they raped her and then they got away with it. So that's also Russia for you, and that's why, once again, I'm telling you why people don't really protest. Because if you get caught, you are versus you are solo against actual fucking orcs from Lord of the Rings, even worse, and you cannot do anything. You can't defend yourself really, because if you defend yourself, you start punching people, fucking murdering them, or if you can get to their gun or whatever. Well, if you won't be dead, you will go through hell. That's why people don't protest, because they understand the consequences of being captured, of being imprisoned. So a lot of people in Ukraine don't understand this, which, again, I'm just trying to explain by showing examples like that what it means to surrender your freedom of movement, essentially. And this person didn't even surrender anything. She just worked there, and this is what happened to her. Anyway, let's finish on Boris Nadezhdin, who is this sort of a candidate who is running right now against Putin, and there is a whole interview with him, and I'm gonna put this into essentially description. He's got few English speaking interviews on YouTube if you wanna search Boris Nadezhdin once again. Unfortunately, his rhetoric is not great, really, and all this thing is just a charade. If he will be allowed to participate in the elections, even if he wins, let's say, let's just pretend this is never gonna happen, but let's pretend he wins. He's not a person who I would support, really. I'm not Russian, first of all, but this is not a person who I would support, because he's not saying that our army committed genocide, essentially. No, he is actually playing on those feelings that they were wronged. Our boy should come home sort of glorious, victorious. He was literally saying sort of words like that. So he is not a good person per se, or he doesn't have real sort of moral core that he can say out loud. And I understand, obviously, that he probably will be jailed if he says everything that I'm saying, but then why are you going into Russian politics and trying to run for a president? But anyway, now the week after I should have been recording this, essentially, CIK, which is a central something committee, election committee, something like that, Central Election Committee, essentially denied his not denied, they didn't deny yet, but they essentially said that there is a percentage of essentially wrongly filed documents there, wrongly file signatures for you, and its whole process is just like he's not going to be allowed to participate in the elections. I'm pretty sure Putin realized what can happen if an independent candidate is allowed, by example of Belarus 2020, where this lovely lady became Tikhanovskaya, obviously I'm talking about, basically became a president of Belarus, because obviously without the falsifications and without 86% fake garbage, she would win, and she did win. It's just I am living in a dictatorship state, and probably Putin doesn't want that, doesn't want embarrassment, doesn't want protests on the streets afterwards, because who knows how it can go, who knows if it will spiral out of control or not. What's interesting is that I didn't prepare it for this particular episode, but there's been going on for several weeks now sort of protests of wives of mobilized soldiers who are saying like, bring our husbands back, sort of go for a second wave of mobilization. We don't give a fuck really, just bring us our husbands. And by the law that exists right now in Russia, they simply cannot and will not be brought back. Essentially, either they die in the war or they are not coming back. Simple as that. So no matter what, they're not coming back. And sort of a lot of liberal, left-leaning leftists in Russia sort of trying to support this idea, protesting with them and so on and so forth. But because so far sort of government doesn't know what to do with them really, because they're kind of pro-war, but kind of just saying like, bring back our husbands. So sort of not really doing anything extremist, so to speak, just going in white, in sort of white headbands or something like that, and like basically not doing anything, putting some flowers to like monuments, things like that. Why I'm saying all of that is that I think a lot of liberals and leftists in Russia, like Maxim Katz and like all of his fucking whatever idiots, they still think that they can like win somehow in the election, that they think that there will be election. And I'm putting really giant air quotes around the term election. They don't really understand that they're already living in the Third Reich, so to speak. They are not in 1920s or whatever. They are in 1941, 42. They're like, there is no election here. And it doesn't matter if this person will be, Nadezhda will be, and it's so interesting that it's like, I swear we're living in a simulation, because his name is Nadezhdin. Nadezhda means hope in Russia. There is literally a candidate who is kind of trying to run against Putin, and he's sort of kind of against the war, whose surname is Hope, or like Hoping. So it would be, like William Hoping, something like that. That's like, I swear we are living in a simulation. It's just like how deep the soul goes, and like what of the outcome of the simulation. I hope that the good sort of wins against evil. I really hope so. So far, unfortunately, it's this kind of in terms of like storytelling tropes, and how screenplays are written, is this like pit, essentially, right? It's like dark times where things are really going really bad for seemingly like everyone around the globe, without seemingly any hope. And so, yeah, I don't know if there's any hope, to be honest, but yeah, it is what it is. So hopefully I've covered essentially everything that I've done in a past episode, in an episode that I screwed up somehow, or was screwed up. Hopefully this one is all fine, no problems. And this is Critical Discussions, episode 28. Please subscribe to YouTube channel. Please follow the social media. And leave your comments about the events that I described in this episode. What do you think about all of that? And I'll talk to you in the next one. Just take care of yourselves, because it's quite a scary world out there, and there are a lot of disinformation, misinformation, and a lot of propaganda. A lot of it is fueled literally by several actors, bad actors, like China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, like I'm saying. Few others. These are just the main offenders nowadays. They're absolutely blatant and don't even hide anything. But try to preserve humanity. There are a lot of sort of people in the United States who literally support Trump and MAGA, and people wake up to this. You can't be have some self-respect. There are literally videos on the internet saying how Trump, if I ever run as a president, I would run as a Republican, because it's so easy to fool those people. There's actually a video of him saying that back from 1995 or something, and yet people are still falling for this, and I just don't get it. How can people? I just don't get it. I've seen several polls on Twitter again. I must be also careful and cautious here, because I've just told you about there are probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Russian bots and propaganda accounts, but it seems like some people are real, because they post their photos and whatnot, probably some Texans or whatever the fuck. And there were a couple polls that who you trust more, Biden or Putin, and there were more than 50,000 people voting, and it was 20% Biden, 80% Putin. I'm are you truly retarded, brain dead? Is something so deeply wrong with you that you literally trust more a fucking international criminal, a terrorist, a pathological liar who literally lies all the time, same with Trump, really, versus your own president, democratically elected fucking president of one of the better fucking countries in the world. Fix your healthcare system and you will be one of the best countries in the world. I don't know. Anyway, enough of this mumbling about. Again, take care of yourselves and subscribe to the channel. Critical Discussions on YouTube. criticaldiscussions.net for all the links. If you want to support what I'm doing here, I would really appreciate. There are some links as well for a few donation options, and see you next one.